On a cold March evening in 2019 in the city of Springfield, Illinois, the bodies of two people, a man and a woman, were found brutally murdered in their own home. The crime, which shocked the city, was the result of 5 years of hatred that had matured behind prison walls. Logan Women's Penitentiary was located 200 miles south of Chicago, a gray concrete building surrounded by barbed wire. It housed women convicted of crimes of varying severity. Hannah Bradshaw, inmate number 47,821, had spent 4 years and 11 months within these walls. She had 3 weeks left before her release. Hannah was 34 years old. Before her arrest, she worked as a waitress in a diner on the south side of Chicago, serving tables, smiling at customers, and collecting tips. Her life was not wealthy, but it was stable. She had a husband, David Norman, a foreman at a construction site, a big man with a loud voice and a habit of drinking in the evenings. They met in a bar and got married 6 months later. They lived in a rented apartment, argued, made up, and planned to have children someday. An ordinary life for ordinary people. Everything changed one night in September 2014. Hannah shared a cell with Andrea Mills, a 41-year-old woman serving time for fraud. Andrea was tall, thin, with short hair and a tired face. She was here for a credit card scam, had defrauded several dozen people, and had been sentenced to 6 years. Andrea was talkative, but not intrusive. Over the years they spent together, they became something like friends, as much as was possible in a prison where trust was a luxury. Now they sat on their bunks in their cramped cell. Andrea leafed through an old magazine, while Hannah looked out the window at the courtyard, where other inmates were walking under the supervision of guards. It was March outside, the sky was gray, and the air was cold. Hannah thought about her upcoming release. Soon, she would be back in Chicago. Soon, she would settle the score. She often thought about that night. Her memory took her back there again and again, like a broken record. She and David were coming back from a bar. It was late, around 2 in the morning, and the streets were empty. They had drunk too much, whiskey for him, gin and tonic for her. David was drunk and angry. Something had upset him back at the bar. Some guy had said something wrong, and David had been grumbling to himself all evening. Hannah tried to calm him down, but he brushed her off. At the corner of 88th Street, they bumped into a man. The stranger was walking towards them, apparently drunk too. David bumped into him with his shoulder. The man said something. David turned around and punched him in the face. A fight broke out. The man was not shy and fought back. They grappled, rolled around on the sidewalk, and punched each other. Hannah screamed, tried to pull her husband away, grabbed his jacket, but he pushed her away. She saw blood on David's face and heard him swearing. Adrenaline flooded her mind. At one point, she noticed a rock on the edge of the sidewalk, a heavy piece of curb about the size of a fist. She grabbed it. She approached the stranger from behind as he tried to pin David to the ground. She hit him on the head with the rock. The man collapsed. David crawled out from under him, gasping for breath. The stranger didn't move. Hannah stood there with the stone in her hand, not understanding what she had just done. Someone called the police. They arrived 10 minutes later. The man was taken to the hospital. Hannah and David were arrested on the spot. The examination showed that the victim had a skull fracture, concussion, and internal bleeding. He survived, but took several months to recover. The investigation established that David Norman had started the fight, but his wife had delivered the fatal blow. The trial was quick. The lawyer turned out to be mediocre. David received 3 months in prison for hooliganism. Hannah received 5 years for causing grievous bodily harm. The judge said that the use of a weapon, even a makeshift one, was an aggravating circumstance. Hannah couldn't believe it. She was defending her husband. She was trying to help him. And now she was in prison, while he got off with a slap on the wrist. In her first year of imprisonment, she was transferred to Logan Correctional Facility. It was a strict regime, with double cells and work in the laundry. Hannah got used to the gray walls, the monotony of the days, the lack of freedom. She waited for letters from David. She waited for him to come to visit her. But there were no letters. 4 months after arriving at the colony, all prisoners underwent a mandatory medical examination. The doctor, an elderly woman with an indifferent face, took blood samples. A week later, Hannah was called back. The doctor announced the result: syphilis, secondary stage. Hannah didn't understand at first. She asked again. The doctor repeated it. Syphilis. Treatment is required. We will start immediately. Hannah sat in the doctor's office and tried to comprehend. She had contracted syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease. She had not slept with anyone but David. That meant he had infected her. That meant he had slept with someone else. Someone who was sick. He had been unfaithful to her, before his arrest. Perhaps he had been unfaithful for a long time. She remembered how he sometimes stayed late after work, how he once came home at 3 in the morning and said he had been with friends, how he smelled of someone else's perfume. She didn't think anything of it. She trusted him. And he led her on. The treatment began. Penicillin injections, every week. Hannah lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Waves of rage washed over her. She had protected this man. She ended up in prison because of him. And he cheated on her, infected her with a disease, and left her here to rot. David served his 3-month sentence in December 2014. He was released. Hannah wrote him a letter, then another. There was no reply. She called him from the prison phone, but he didn't answer. A month passed. 2, 3, nothing. Hannah realized he had disappeared. He had abandoned her. He hadn't even tried to support her. The years dragged on slowly. Work in the laundry room, breakfast and dinner in the dining hall, rare walks in the yard, the cell. Hannah was silent. Something dark and cold was growing inside her. She thought about David every day. She imagined how she would find him. She imagined what she would say to him, what she would do. Andrea noticed the change. One evening, as they sat in the cell, she asked, "What are you thinking about, Hannah?" Hannah turned to her. She was silent for a few seconds. Then she said, "About my husband, about what he did." Andrea put down her magazine. She nodded. "You never really told me. What happened?" Hannah began to speak. She told her everything. About the fight, about the trial, about the syphilis, about how David disappeared without looking back. Andrea listened silently. When Hannah finished, silence hung in the cell. "He abandoned you," Andrea said quietly. "He just took you out of his life." "Yes." Hannah clenched her fists. "I defended him. I got the sentence instead of him. And he infected me, cheated on me, left me here, as if I meant nothing to him. What are you going to do when you get out?" Hannah looked out the window. A gray sky was visible beyond the bars. "I'll find him. I'll tell him everything I think. He'll answer for what he did." Andrea was silent for a moment. Then she said cautiously, "Hannah, I understand how you feel. But if you do something stupid, you'll be back here, forever. Is it worth it?" Hannah turned to her. There was cold determination in her eyes. "He stole my life, Andrea. 5 years. 5 years in this cage. Because of him. He needs to know how I feel. He'll pay." Andrea sighed. She realized there was no changing her mind. "Then be careful. Don't do anything on impulse. Think carefully." Hannah didn't answer. She lay down on the bunk and closed her eyes. March 2019 dawned cold and gray. On the 21st, Hannah was summoned to the colony warden's office, where she was handed her release papers. She had served her full 5-year sentence. She received a certificate, a modest amount of money she had saved from working in the laundry, and some clothes to wear. Andrea hugged her goodbye, wished her luck, and asked her not to do anything stupid. Hannah nodded, but they both knew it was a futile request. The bus took her to Chicago by evening. The city greeted her with lights, noise, and the smell of exhaust fumes. Everything seemed too loud, too fast after the silence of prison. Hannah took the subway to the south side, got off at a familiar station, and walked the streets of her childhood. Her mother's house was still there, a small one-story house with peeling paint on the walls. Hannah knew her mother had died. Maggie had written to her about it a year ago. A stroke. Death was instantaneous. Hannah couldn't come to the funeral. They wouldn't even let her out under escort. She found out about her mother's death a week after the event, when the letter finally reached the prison. The house was empty. The neighbors said that no one had been there since the funeral. Hannah opened the door with the spare key that was always kept under the flower pot on the porch. Inside, it smelled musty and dusty. The furniture was still in place. The photos were on the walls. The rooms were empty. Hannah went into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and looked at the old curtains. Her mother had left without waiting for her release. Another loss that Hannah blamed on David. The next day, she met with Maggie Slouk. They had arranged it over the phone. Maggie suggested meeting at a diner on Stony Island Avenue, a cheap place that served burgers and coffee. Hannah arrived first, ordered coffee, and sat by the window. 10 minutes later, Maggie appeared. Maggie Slouk had been her friend since school. They grew up in the same neighborhood, studied in the same class, and shared secrets. Maggie became an elementary school teacher, worked at a nearby school, was married, but divorced 2 years ago. She was the only one who kept in touch with Hannah during her imprisonment. She wrote letters and came to visit her twice a year. Hannah was grateful to her. Maggie hugged her when they met, sat down opposite her, and ordered tea. They talked a little about life, about prison, about how Hannah was feeling. Then Hannah got to the point. "Maggie, have you heard anything about David?" Maggie fell silent. She looked away. Then she nodded. "Yes, I did. Hannah, I'm sorry, but I have to tell you, he got married." Hannah froze. She knew she would hear something like this, but the words still hit her like a slap in the face. "He got married?" "Yes, a year and a half after he got out. To a girl named Monica Carter. Now she's Monica Norman. They moved to Springfield, live in the suburbs. They live quietly. David works as a foreman on a construction site. I found out through mutual friends. I didn't want to tell you before it was time, but since you asked." Hannah was silent. She squeezed her coffee cup so hard that her knuckles turned white. Maggie put her hand on her shoulder. "Hannah, I know how you feel. But it's been 5 years. People change. He's moved on. Maybe you should try to start over too. Forget him?" Hannah looked up. There was a cold fury in her eyes that Maggie had never seen before. "Forget him?" Hannah said quietly. "He infected me. He left me in prison. He married someone else while I was rotting behind bars because of him. And you want me to forget him?" Maggie looked away. She withdrew her hand. "I just don't want you to do something you'll regret." Hannah took a sip of coffee. It tasted bitter. "I need his address, Maggie." "Hannah, I need his address." Maggie sighed. She took out her phone, found the entry, and dictated the address. Hannah wrote it down on a napkin. Street, house number, Springfield, 2,000 miles away. "Thanks," Hannah said. They finished their drinks in silence. Maggie could see that her friend had changed. Prison had made her tougher, colder. The softness in her eyes was gone. Only one thing remained, a thirst for justice that was more like a thirst for revenge. As they said goodbye on the street, Maggie tried again. "Hannah, please think about it. Don't act rashly. He's not worth going back to prison for." Hannah looked at her. She smiled faintly. "Don't worry about me. I just want to talk to him. To say everything I think. He needs to hear it." Maggie nodded, but didn't believe a word. They hugged goodbye. Hannah walked to the subway. The napkin with the address was in her jacket pocket. She returned home in the evening. She sat down at the table, took out the napkin, and looked at the address. Springfield. David Norman. 200 miles. Tomorrow morning she would go there. She would find him. She would tell him everything that had accumulated over 5 years. And then she would see. She would take it as it came. She went to sleep in her mother's old bedroom, a cold, empty room, and stared at the ceiling for a long time until she fell into a restless sleep. In the morning, Hannah bought a bus ticket to Springfield. The bus left at 9 o'clock from the bus station on Harrison Street. She sat by the window, put her bag on her lap, and watched Chicago recede behind her. The bus pulled onto the highway and headed south through the flat fields of Illinois. There were few passengers, an elderly couple in front, a man in a suit across the aisle, a few students in the back rows. Everyone was silent, busy with their own affairs. Hannah didn't sleep. She looked out the window at the towns, gas stations, and farms passing by. She thought about what she would say to David. She rehearsed the words in her head. She had been waiting for this conversation for 5 years. For 5 years, she had been saving up everything she wanted to say to him. Now the time had come. The trip took about 3 hours. The bus arrived in Springfield at noon. Hannah got off at the bus station and asked the dispatcher how to get to the address on the napkin. The dispatcher looked at it and explained that she needed to take bus number 12 to the suburbs, get off at Maple Street, and walk 10 minutes from there. Hannah bought a ticket and got on the bus. The town outside the window was small and provincial. Low buildings, quiet streets, few cars. It was nothing like Chicago. She got off at Maple Street around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a residential street lined with one-story houses with small yards. The trees were still bare, and the grass was withered after winter. Hannah walked along the sidewalk, checking the address. She found the right house, number 123. It was a small, one-story cottage with gray walls, white shutters, and a porch at the entrance. There was a car parked in front of the house, a blue pickup truck, not new, but well-maintained. That meant David was home. Hannah stopped at the gate. Her heart was beating steadily, without fear or excitement, only cold determination. She walked up the path to the porch, climbed the steps, and pressed the doorbell. She heard footsteps inside. The door opened. David Norman was standing in the doorway. He hadn't changed much. The same large, broad-shouldered man with short hair and a heavy chin. He had aged a little. Wrinkles had appeared around his eyes, and his hair had turned gray. He was dressed casually, jeans and a gray t-shirt. He looked at Hannah blankly, not recognizing her. Then his face changed. Recognition flashed in his eyes, then contempt. "Hannah?" he said slowly. "Is that you?" She was silent, looking at him. 5 years had passed since they last saw each other. 5 years she had spent behind bars while he was here, free, building a new life. "What are you doing here?" David asked. His voice was dissatisfied, almost contemptuous. "I want to talk," Hannah said. "You owe me a conversation, David." He smirked. He crossed his arms over his chest and leaned against the doorframe. "Owe you? I don't owe you anything. Get out of here." "You infected me," Hannah said quietly. "Syphilis. I found out in prison at my first medical examination. I could only sleep with you, David. So you were cheating on me. You were seeing prostitutes while I was working, bringing money home. And then I went to prison for protecting you in that fight. You started the fight, and I got 5 years. And you didn't even write to me. You never came to see me. You left me there to rot." David listened, a smirk on his face. When she finished, he laughed, short, angry. "Infected you? Are you serious? Hannah, you're a convict. You spent 5 years in prison with a bunch of other convicts. Maybe you picked something up there, huh? Don't blame everything on me." "I know it was you." Hannah clenched her fists. "I know you cheated on me. Don't deny it." "Okay, fine," David shrugged. "Yes, I cheated. So what? You think I regret it? We were married, but that doesn't mean I had to sit at home like a monk. You only live once, Hannah. I took what I wanted from life. And you went to prison. It's your own fault. You hit that guy with a rock, so you got sentenced. I got off with a slap on the wrist. It's not my problem that you were stupid and messed up." Hannah looked at him, not believing her ears. He said it calmly, without a hint of regret, as if he were discussing the weather. "I defended you," she said slowly. "You were lying under that man. He was beating you, and I saved you. That's why I ended up in prison. And you." "And I," David interrupted, "built a new life. Without you. I found a normal woman, got married, and lived peacefully. I work as a foreman, make good money. Everything's fine with me, Hannah. And you? Who are you? An ex-con with a criminal record, no job, no future. You're the scum of society, and you came here to make demands of me? Seriously?" His words hit her like slaps in the face. Hannah felt rage boiling up inside her, but she kept herself under control. "You're a scumbag, David. I'm a scumbag?" He laughed again. "Maybe so, but I'm free. I have a home, a wife, a job. And you? Nothing. You're a nobody. Now get off my doorstep before I call the police. I don't want you here. I don't want you ruining my life. I don't need you anymore. I never really needed you. Is that clear?" Hannah froze. Something inside her snapped. She looked at this man she had lived with for several years, whom she considered her husband, whom she had protected, and all she saw was a stranger, a cold, cruel man. Unable to control herself, she grabbed a vase from the shelf in the hallway, a white ceramic vase with artificial flowers, and threw it on the floor. The vase shattered into pieces, the shards scattering across the floor. "You're crazy!" David shouted. "Get out! Now! Or I'll call the cops and you'll go back to prison." Hannah turned and walked away. She heard David slam the door behind her. She went down the steps and out the gate. She walked down the sidewalk without looking back. Rage raged inside her, but she forced herself to keep going, not to turn around. A few blocks away, she found a cafe, a small eatery with a sign that read, "Joe's." She went inside and sat down at a table by the window. The waitress, a girl of about 20 with a tired face, approached and handed her a menu. Hannah ordered coffee and a chicken sandwich. The waitress nodded and left. Hannah sat and looked out the window. Rare passers-by walked down the street. Cars drove by. Life went on, indifferent to her pain. They brought her coffee, then a sandwich. She ate slowly, not tasting anything. She thought. David had no remorse. He didn't admit his guilt. He didn't even try to justify himself. He just laughed in her face, insulted her, and kicked her out. He said she was nobody, that he had built a new life and she was trash. The clock ticked. Noon turned into afternoon, afternoon into evening. Hannah sat in the cafe, ordered another coffee, then another. The waitress glanced at her curiously but didn't ask any questions. There were few customers, an elderly couple at the next table, a man in work clothes at the bar. By 7 in the evening, the cafe was almost empty. Something cold and unbearable was growing inside Hannah. The rage she had held back for 5 years was bursting out. David hadn't just left her, he had trampled on her life and then laughed at her. He said she meant nothing, that he was better off without her, that she was nobody. Hannah looked at the cutlery in front of her, a fork, a knife, an ordinary table knife with a serrated blade and a wooden handle. She looked at the waitress, who was standing at the counter talking to the cook. She wasn't looking in her direction. Hannah took the knife. She put it in her jacket pocket. She stood up, left the money on the table, and left the cafe. It was getting dark outside. The streetlights came on, illuminating the sidewalks with yellow light. Hannah walked back to David's house. She walked slowly, evenly, without attracting attention. She reached the right street and saw the familiar house. The lights were on in the windows. The pickup truck was still parked in the driveway. Hannah approached the porch. She climbed the steps. She pressed the doorbell. She heard footsteps inside. Light, feminine footsteps. The door opened. A young woman stood in the doorway, Monica Norman, David's wife. She was short, slim, with dark hair tied back in a ponytail. She was dressed casually in jeans and a pink sweater. She looked at Hannah with surprise. "Yes? Do you need something?" she asked. Hannah didn't answer. She took the knife out of her pocket. Monica saw the blade, her eyes widened, and she tried to step back. She didn't make it. Hannah stepped forward and stabbed her in the stomach. Monica screamed and doubled over. Hannah stabbed her again, this time in the chest. Monica fell to the floor of the hallway, gasping for air. Blood flowed onto the floor, dark and thick. She tried to say something, but only wheezes came out of her throat. After a few seconds, she fell silent. Hannah stood over the body, holding the bloody knife. She looked at the stairs leading to the second floor. She could hear the sound of the TV, voices, music. David was there. She climbed the stairs. The steps creaked under her feet, but the sound of the TV drowned out everything. At the top was a small living room. The TV was against the wall, showing the news. David was sitting in an armchair with his back to the stairs, watching the screen. He didn't hear her. Hannah approached from behind. She raised the knife and stabbed David in the shoulder. He screamed, lunged forward, and fell from the chair onto the floor. Blood gushed from the wound, soaking his t-shirt. David rolled onto his back and saw Hannah with the knife, his face contorted with pain and horror. You're crazy!" he shouted. "What are you doing?" Hannah stood over him. She looked at him coldly, without emotion. "You stole my life, David," she said quietly. "You infected me. You cheated on me. You left me to rot in prison for 5 years. You married someone else. You laughed in my face when I came. You said I was nobody. You're a scumbag, a traitor. You don't deserve to live." David tried to crawl away, grabbing the floor with his hand, leaving bloody marks. His face was pale, his eyes filled with fear. "Hannah, wait, please. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." "It's too late," said Hannah. She struck him again, in the chest, then again. David gasped, looked at her imploringly, tried to say something. Hannah struck him again and again, without stopping. All the rage, all the pain of 5 years came out. When she stopped, David was no longer moving. His eyes stared at the ceiling, empty. Hannah straightened up. She looked at the knife in her hand, covered in blood. At her hands, also covered in blood. At David's body on the floor. She had killed him. She had killed his wife, too. Her life was over, but she didn't care. She left the house. She went down the stairs past Monica's body. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The night air was cold. Hannah walked down the street, holding the bloody knife in her hand. She didn't try to hide. She didn't hurry. She just walked. Somewhere in the distance, sirens could be heard. Maybe one of the neighbors had heard the screams and called the police. Hannah kept walking. The streetlights illuminated her figure. She walked down the empty street, knowing that her life had ended the moment she entered David's house. But she didn't care. She had finally gotten what she wanted. David had finally paid. 3 days later, the police arrested Hannah Bradshaw at a motel on the outskirts of Chicago. She did not resist. She confessed to everything right away. The trial was quick. She was found guilty of double first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Hannah accepted the sentence without emotion. She was returned to Logan Correctional Facility, this time for good.